The morning mist clung to the market square of Thornfield like a veil of secrets, obscuring the edges of propriety that defined the lives of its inhabitants. It was upon this stage of cobblestones and whispers that Miss Celine Ashcroft found herself at the center of an unfolding calamity. Her cream-colored dress, simple yet elegant, stood in stark contrast to the gathering darkness of murmurs that surrounded her. "I believe, sir, that you have mistaken me for someone of lesser virtue," she pronounced with quiet dignity, though her hands, clasped before her chest, betrayed her rising anxiety. Lord Crispin Vale, his golden hair catching the weak morning light, merely laughed, a sound like breaking glass in the hushed market. "My dear Miss Ashcroft, I merely offered to escort you home. Is that truly so scandalous?" His eyes, however, told a different tale, one of conquest disguised as chivalry. The market-goers had ceased their transactions, forming a circle of silent judgment around the tableau. Mrs. Hemsley, the butcher's wife, clicked her tongue against her teeth, a sound that could destroy a young woman's reputation as efficiently as any proclamation. "The lady has declined," came a voice deep and commanding, parting the crowd with its authority before its owner had even emerged. The Duke of Westmoreland, Adrian Vance, stepped forward, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the cobblestones. His greatcoat, dark as midnight, seemed to absorb the morning light rather than reflect it. With gloved hands, one adjusting the silver chain of his pocket watch, he moved with the deliberate grace of a man accustomed to being observed. "Your Grace," Lord Cripson bowed, mockery dancing in his eyes. "I had no notion that Miss Ashcroft was under your particular protection." A deadly silence fell upon the gathering. The implication in his words hung in the air like a blade. "Miss Ashcroft is the ward of my late cousin," the Duke replied, his grey eyes as cold and unyielding as winter stone. "Her reputation is a matter of family honour, not a subject for market gossip." He turned to Celine, and for an instant something warmer than duty flickered across his severe features. "Your chaperone appears to have been delayed, Miss Ashcroft. Allow me to escort you to safer quarters." Before the stunned onlookers, he offered his arm with such formal correctness that none could find cause for scandal, yet the gesture contained an unmistakable pledge. Celine, her blue eyes wide with both relief and trepidation, placed her gloved hand upon his sleeve. As they departed the market square, the Duke spoke without looking at her. "This is the third such incident this month, Miss Ashcroft. Your penchant for venturing out unaccompanied must cease." "The physician required fresh herbs for my father's tincture," she replied, her voice soft but unrepentant. "Mrs. Finch had taken ill this morning." He sighed, a sound of restrained frustration. "Then you should have sent word to me, and become a greater burden than I already am?" The words escaped before propriety could contain them. The Duke halted their progress, turning to face her fully. For a fleeting moment, the rigid mask of aristocratic indifference slipped, revealing a man rather than a title. "Is that how you perceive yourself? As a burden I bear unwillingly?" His voice had softened dangerously. Celine met his gaze with surprising steadiness. "Is that not what I am, Your Grace? The obligation you inherited along with your cousin's estate." A carriage rattled past, splashing through a puddle and forcing them to step closer to the shelter of a shop awning. In that momentary intimacy, Adrian Vance seemed to struggle with words that existed beyond the vocabulary of his station. "You are many things, Miss Ashcroft," he finally said, his voice pitched so that only she could hear it, but never that. Before she could respond, he guided her onward, his posture once again rigid with propriety. They walked in silence past the church, where Reverend Elias Ward observed their passage with thoughtful eyes. That evening, seated in the Duke's study, Celine watched as Adrian Vance composed a letter, the scratch of his pen providing the only sound in the austere chamber. The flickering candlelight caught the silver threads at his temples, rendering him a figure of both authority and isolation. "I have written to my aunt, the Duchess of Vale," he announced, dripping crimson wax upon the folded parchment. "She will arrive within the fortnight to serve as your companion and guide." Celine's heart constricted. The Duchess Meridia Vale was renowned for her merciless adherence to social protocol. "You believe I require such strict supervision?" "I believe," he replied, pressing his signet ring into the cooling wax, "that I am ill-equipped to protect you from the gossip already spreading through Thornfield." He looked up then, his grey eyes haunted by something deeper than concern for mere propriety. "I made a promise to keep you safe, Miss Ashcroft. I shall not fail in that duty, even if it means summoning the most formidable guardian in all of England." As he handed her the sealed letter to review, their fingers brushed. an infinitesimal contact that nonetheless sent a current of awareness through them both. The silver medallion at his throat gleamed in the candlelight, a symbol of the noble burden he carried. "And if safety becomes a prison?" Celine asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the sealed letter rather than his face. The Duke rose and moved to stand before the fire, his broad shoulders taut with unspoken tension. "Then I shall have kept my word, if not your happiness." Outside, the evening mist descended upon the gardens of Thornfield Manor, enveloping the blooming spring flowers in its cold embrace, much as duty enclosed the hearts within. The Duchess of Vale arrived precisely 13 days after the market incident, descending from her carriage like winter personified. Meridia Vale's silver hair was arranged in an immaculate coiffure, not a single strand daring to escape its assigned position. Her gown of slate-grey silk rustled with disapproval as she surveyed the facade of Thornfield Manor. "Nephew," she pronounced, extending a gloved hand that accepted rather than offered affection. "I trust you recognize the gravity of your situation." Adrian Vance bowed with perfect formality over his aunt's hand. "Your presence honors us, Duchess. Thornfield has been in need of a mistress since my father's passing." Her pale eyes narrowed. "I come not as mistress, but as guardian. Society already whispers of your unusual household arrangements." From the entrance hall, Selene watched this exchange with a composure that belied her racing heart. She stepped forward when summoned, executing a flawless curtsy before the Duchess. "Miss Ashcroft." Meridia Vale's gaze traveled from Celine's modest blue gown to her carefully arranged hair. "I have heard much of you. I hope I may prove worthy of your Grace's guidance," Celine replied, her voice steady despite the chill emanating from the older woman. "We shall see." The Duchess turned to her nephew. "Adrian, you will excuse us. Miss Ashcroft and I have much to discuss regarding her comportment." When they were alone in the drawing room, Meridia circled Celine like a hawk, assessing its prey. "You possess beauty without ostentation, a dangerous combination for a young woman without family connections." Celine remained still under the scrutiny. "I am grateful for His Grace's protection." "Protection?" The Duchess laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Is that what you call it? The entire county speaks of nothing else but the Duke's ward who has ensnared him with her innocent charms." A flush crept up Celine's neck. "There is nothing between His Grace and myself save his sense of obligation." "Then you are perhaps the only soul in Thornfield who believes so?" Meridia Vale removed her gloves with deliberate slowness. "I have known my nephew since he was a boy. Duty is the very marrow of his being, and you, my dear, have become his most dangerous duty." That evening, the small dinner party assembled in the formal dining room was a masterclass in strained civility. Reverend Elias Ward had been invited along with Sir Rowan Grey, a distant connection of the Duchess, who had accompanied her from London. "I understand you are interested in botany, Miss Ashcroft," Sir Rowan remarked as servants removed the soup course. His gentle manner provided a stark contrast to the Duchess's frigidity. "Indeed, Sir Rowan, the medicinal properties of native plants have been my study these past years. A peculiar pursuit for a young lady," observed the Duchess. "One might think you were training to be an apothecary's wife, rather than a gentleman's daughter." Reverend Ward intervened with diplomatic skill. "The good Lord's creations offer healing to all who seek it, regardless of station. I have found Miss Ashcroft's knowledge invaluable for our parish poor." The Duke, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke. "Miss Ashcroft's botanical studies were encouraged by my cousin. I see no reason to curtail intellectual pursuits that bring benefit to the community." "How progressive you have become, nephew." The Duchess sipped her wine. "One wonders what other conventions you might be willing to discard." Adrian's fingers tightened imperceptibly around his fork, the only indication of his displeasure. "Tradition without compassion is merely ritual, aunt. My father taught me that." "Your father," she replied icily, "would be most concerned about certain rumors reaching London." A strained silence descended upon the table. Celine studied the pattern of her plate with newfound intensity, while Sir Rowan glanced between the Duke and his aunt with thoughtful eyes. Later in the drawing room, Selene sat at the pianoforte, her fingers moving across the keys with restrained emotion. The melody, a minor key sonata, filled the room with gentle melancholy. From her vantage point, she observed the Duchess in close conversation with her nephew near the fireplace, their silhouettes sharp against the dancing flames. Reverend Ward approached, taking a seat nearby. "Music speaks what words cannot, does it not, Miss Ashcroft?" She offered him a small smile. "It offers refuge when speech would be imprudent, Reverend." "You navigate treacherous waters with remarkable grace," he noted, his kind eyes reflecting understanding. "His Grace is fortunate to have such a steady presence in his household. I fear the Duchess does not share your assessment." The clergyman's response was measured. "The Duchess measures worth by lineage and fortune. His Grace, I believe, has begun to recognize other forms of nobility." Across the room, Adrian's voice suddenly rose. "I gave my word, Aunt. I shall not abandon her to the mercy of society's judgment." The Duchess's reply was too low to hear, but the Duke's reaction, a stiffening of his proud shoulders, was evident to all. He turned abruptly and crossed to the pianoforte. "Would you play something more cheerful, Miss Ashcroft?" he requested, his voice controlled but his eyes revealing inner turmoil. "Perhaps that Scottish air you practiced last week." Selene nodded, transitioning seamlessly to a brighter melody. As she played, the Duke remained beside her, turning pages with attentive care. When their hands accidentally brushed, he did not withdraw immediately but allowed the contact to linger for a breath longer than propriety dictated. The Duchess observed this tableau with narrowed eyes, her fan snapping open with a sound like fate sealing a decree. That night, unable to sleep, Selene ventured to the library, seeking solace in literature. She had not expected to find the Duke there, standing before the window, his figure silhouetted against the moonlit garden. "Miss Ashcroft." He turned at her entrance, his formal address at odds with the lateness of the hour and the absence of servants. "You should not be here unaccompanied." "Forgive me, Your Grace. I did not expect to find anyone awake." She moved to withdraw, but his voice halted her. "Stay." The single word contained a wealth of unspoken sentiment. "I find sleep elusive tonight as well." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them, filled with words neither dared speak. "My aunt believes I should send you away," he finally said, his gaze returning to the night beyond the window. "To a school in Switzerland, perhaps, or to distant relations in Scotland." Celine's heart contracted painfully, but her voice remained steady. "And what do you believe, Your Grace?" Adrian Vance turned to her then, the moonlight revealing a face torn between conflicting loyalties. He took a step toward her, then stopped, as though encountering an invisible barrier. "I believe," he said with quiet intensity, "that I no longer know where duty ends and desire begins." In the stillness of the library, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of generations, they stood at the precipice of a truth too dangerous to acknowledge, yet too profound to deny. The assembly hall in Thornfield Village glittered with candlelight, transforming the modest space into a reasonable facsimile of London elegance. Local gentry and visiting nobility mingled in a carefully choreographed dance of status and connection, while musicians played a gentle waltz from the gallery. Duchess Meridia Vale held court near the refreshment table, her imposing figure draped in black silk and adorned with pearls that glowed with cold fire against her throat. Around her gathered the arbiters of local society, eager to align themselves with her formidable influence. "The Duke appears uncommonly attentive to his ward," observed Mrs. Harrington, wife of the magistrate. "One might almost suspect a tenderness beyond guardianship." The Duchess's smile was as sharp as cut crystal. "My nephew understands his responsibilities. Miss Ashcroft's situation requires certain accommodations of propriety." "Indeed." Mrs. Harrington leaned closer. "I had heard that the girl's father was once a gentleman of means before his investments failed." "Speculation has been the downfall of many respectable families," the Duchess replied. "Miss Ashcroft's present circumstances are a poignant reminder of fortune's fickleness." Across the room, Selene stood in conversation with Sir Rowan Grey and Lady Amara Wynne, a childhood acquaintance recently returned from London. Her gown of pale blue silk, a gift from the Duke that had arrived mysteriously that morning, caught the light as she moved, lending her an ethereal quality. "You have become the subject of considerable interest," Lady Amara noted with a mischievous smile. "Every gentleman in attendance has inquired after your circumstances." Sir Rowan nodded. "And every lady has inquired after the Duke's intentions." Selene maintained her composure, though a flush betrayed her awareness of the scrutiny. "His Grace has been most honourable in fulfilling his obligations to his late cousin." "Honour is a complex virtue," Sir Rowan observed, his thoughtful gaze travelling to the Duke, who stood in conversation with Reverend Ward, "especially when it constrains rather than liberates." Lady Amara's eyes sparkled with keen perception. "And especially when other virtues begin to vie for precedence." Before Selene could respond, Lord Crispin Vale approached, his elegant figure commanding attention with practiced ease. "Miss Ashcroft, You are positively luminous this evening. Might I claim the honor of the next dance? A momentary silence fell over their small circle. To refuse would create awkwardness. To accept might invite further gossip after the market incident. Celine hesitated, caught between social obligation and prudence. I believe Miss Ashcroft has already promised the next set to me, came the Duke's voice, as he materialized at her side with impeccable timing. Lord Crispin's smile tightened. How fortunate she is to have such a vigilant guardian. As the orchestra began the opening notes of a country dance, the Duke led Celine onto the floor. Other couples joined them, forming two long lines of finery and expectation. When they came together in the pattern of the dance, Adrian spoke in low tones that would not carry to curious ears. You appeared in need of rescue once again, Miss Ashcroft. Her gloved hand touched his briefly as they turned. Your interventions are becoming a habit, Your Grace, one I find difficult to break. His grey eyes held hers for a moment longer than the dance required. The blue of your gown becomes you. The anonymous benefactor has excellent taste, she replied, a hint of question in her voice. The corner of his mouth lifted in the ghost of a smile. Perhaps he knows that certain colors enhance what is already perfect. They separated as the dance demanded, moving down the line before coming together again. The brief touches of their hands, dictated by the choreography, seemed charged with significance beyond the ritual. The Duchess has been sharing observations about me, Celine noted during their next convergence. None, I suspect, particularly flattering. A shadow crossed his features. My aunt sees threats where I see only— He stopped as though approaching dangerous territory. Only what, Your Grace? The dance brought them together one final time before the music concluded. Only qualities I have come to value beyond measure, he finished, his voice barely audible. As the set ended and he escorted her from the floor, they became aware of the focused attention their dance had attracted. The Duchess's expression was particularly forbidding as they approached. A most spirited performance, nephew, she commented, though perhaps overly enthusiastic for a gentleman of your standing. Before Adrian could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew all attention. A messenger, travel-worn and urgent, scanned the gathering before his gaze settled on the Duke. Your Grace, he called, approaching with a sealed letter extended. Forgive the interruption, but this communication was marked most urgent. The Duke broke the seal and scanned the contents, his expression shifting from curiosity to grave concern. He folded the letter deliberately and addressed his aunt. I must return to Thornfield immediately. There has been a fire in the East Wing. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the nearby guests. The Duchess frowned. Surely the servants can manage until morning. The damage appears significant, Adrian replied, his tone brooking no argument. Miss Ashcroft's chambers were affected. Celine's hand flew to her throat. My father's letters, the botanical journals. I shall escort you home directly, the Duke said, his concern evident. Sir Rowan, might I impose upon you to see my aunt home when she wishes to depart? The journey back to Thornfield passed in tense silence, the carriage racing through the night. When they arrived, the acrid smell of smoke still hung in the air, though the flames had been extinguished. Servants bustled about with buckets and salvaged items, directed by the efficient housekeeper, Mrs. Winters. The fire began in Miss Ashcroft's sitting room, Your Grace, she reported. Her candle left burning, it seems, though Miss Ashcroft insists she extinguished all lights before departing. Celine stood amidst the chaos, her face pale with distress. I am certain I left no candle lit. I am most particular about such matters. The Duke surveyed the damage with a grim expression. Show me precisely where the fire originated. Mrs. Winters led them to Selene's chambers, where charred furniture and blackened walls testified to the fire's intensity. The Duke examined the remains of a writing desk with particular attention. Were any letters or papers recovered? He inquired. Very few, Your Grace. Most were consumed by the flames. Celine moved to a scorched cabinet and opened it with trembling hands. My father's research, his life's work. Her voice broke as she lifted the charred remains of a leather-bound journal. Adrian approached, standing close enough that only she could hear his words. This was no accident. She looked up at him, comprehension dawning in her eyes. You believe someone deliberately— I believe, he interrupted, his voice dropping further, that someone wishes to destroy more than just papers. As they stood amidst the ruins of her private sanctuary, a silent understanding passed between them. The fire had consumed more than possessions. It had incinerated the last pretense that Celine's presence at Thornfield was merely a matter of duty and obligation. In the corridor outside, a small object caught the Duke's attention. a fragment of a wax seal bearing an unfamiliar crest, partially melted but still discernible. He slipped it into his pocket without comment, his expression hardening with resolve. "You will take new quarters in the West Wing," he instructed Celine, loud enough for the servants to hear. "Mrs. Winters will see that everything you require is provided." Later, as the household settled into uneasy slumber, the Duke stood in his study, examining the fragment of wax by lamplight. The emblem it bore was not one he recognized from the local gentry. A soft knock at the door preceded Selina's entrance. She had changed into a simple grey dress borrowed from one of the maids, her hair hanging in a single braid down her back. In this unadorned state, without the trappings of society's expectations, her natural grace was even more evident. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace," she said, remaining near the door. "I could not rest without expressing my gratitude for your swift action tonight." Adrian set down the wax fragment. "No gratitude is necessary for fulfilling my promise of protection. Nevertheless, I offer it freely." She paused, then added with quiet intensity, "as I offer my trust in confiding that I believe the fire was indeed deliberate." Their eyes met across the room, a moment of perfect understanding suspended between them, like a bridge across a chasm of propriety and station. Neither moved to cross it, yet neither looked away. "Whatever threatens you," Adrian Vance said at last, his voice deepened by emotion he no longer attempted to disguise, "threatens what I hold most dear in this world." The medallion at his throat gleamed in the lamplight, a symbol of the duty that both bound and separated them. Yet in that moment, something shifted, a silent acknowledgement that some promises transcend even the sacred bonds of honor. The morning following the fire dawned with a leaden sky that mirrored the atmosphere within Thornfield Manor. Celine stood at the window of her new chambers, observing the gardeners clearing debris from the damaged east wing. The acrid scent of charred timber lingered in the air, a pungent reminder of how quickly security could transform to ash. "I have taken inventory of your salvaged possessions, miss," said Martha, the lady's maid assigned by Mrs. Winters. "I regret that precious little survived the conflagration." Selina turned from the window, composing her features into a mask of serenity that belied her inner turmoil. "Thank you, Martha. The material loss is considerable, but I am grateful that no lives were endangered." A soft knock at the door heralded Lady Amara Wynne, whose concerned expression brightened upon seeing Celine. "My dear friend, when I heard of the calamity, I came straight away." She embraced Celine with genuine affection. "How do you fare amidst such tumult?" "I am well enough," Selina replied, gesturing for Martha to withdraw. When they were alone, she continued in hushed tones, "Though I confess to certain disquieting suspicions regarding the fire's origin." Lady Amara's eyes widened. "You believe it deliberate? But who would—" Understanding dawned in her expression. "The Duchess has made her disapprobation abundantly clear." "I dare not accuse without evidence," Selina cautioned, seating herself at the small writing desk. "Yet the timing seems too convenient to be mere happenstance." Lady Amara settled beside her, adjusting her emerald silk skirts. "The entire assembly observed your dance with the Duke. It was as though you existed in a private universe, oblivious to the spectators." A flush rose to Celine's cheeks. His Grace was merely being courteous. "Courteous?" Lady Amara laughed softly. "My dear, I have known Adrian Vance since we were children. Not once have I witnessed him look at any woman as he looked at you last evening." Before Celine could respond, the door opened without ceremony, admitting the Duchess of Vale. Her imperious gaze settled upon Lady Amara with frigid disapproval. "Lady Wynne, I was not aware we were entertaining visitors so early in the day." Lady Amara rose and curtsied with practiced grace. "Duchess, I came to offer comfort to Miss Ashcroft after hearing of last night's unfortunate incident." "Most considerate," the Duchess replied with a smile that never reached her eyes. "However, Miss Ashcroft requires rest rather than social exertion. Perhaps you might call again at a more appropriate hour." The dismissal was unmistakable. With a sympathetic glance at Celine, Lady Amara took her leave, promising to return the following day. When the door closed, the Duchess surveyed Celine with calculated assessment. "How curious that the fire should originate in your quarters on the very evening you captivated every gentleman at the assembly." Celine met the older woman's gaze with quiet dignity. "I assure you, Your Grace, I had no intention of captivating anyone." "Intention is irrelevant when the result is so evident." The Duchess moved to the window, her rigid posture a study in controlled disdain. "My nephew has arranged for you to reside in the West Wing, notably closer to the family apartments than propriety would dictate. The arrangement is temporary, I am certain. Nothing concerning you appears temporary in Adrian's considerations. The Duchess turned, her pale eyes as cold as winter frost. Let us speak plainly, Miss Ashcroft. What are your ambitions regarding the Duke of Westmoreland? Celine stood, her composure faltering slightly at the directness of the question. I have no ambitions beyond gratitude for his protection. A convenient sentiment, particularly when expressed by a young woman of limited means and questionable background. A flash of indignation colored Celine's reply. My father was a gentleman, Your Grace, regardless of his financial misfortunes. A gentleman who consigned his daughter to dependency upon distant connections, the Duchess countered. Do not mistake charity for affection, Miss Ashcroft. Adrian fulfills his obligations with extraordinary conscientiousness, a quality you appear to have misconstrued. The door opened once more, revealing the Duke himself, his expression darkening as he registered the tension between the two women. Aunt, I had not expected to find you here. I was merely ensuring Miss Ashcroft had recovered from last night's excitement, the Duchess replied smoothly. Both the assembly and the subsequent drama. Adrian's gaze moved to Celine, softening imperceptibly. How do you fare this morning? I am quite well, Your Grace. Your swift intervention prevented greater loss. The Duke nodded, then addressed his aunt with pointed courtesy. Sir Rowan awaits you in the library. He has received correspondence that requires your attention. When the Duchess had departed, a weighted silence descended upon the room. Adrian moved to the mantelpiece, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the morning light. I must apologize for my aunt's manner, he began, his voice carrying the restraint of profound emotion. Her concern for the family name often overwhelms her capacity for compassion. Celine approached, stopping at a distance that honored propriety, while permitting private conversation. No apology is necessary. The Duchess merely expresses what others whisper, that my presence here invites misinterpretation. And what do you believe? Adrian asked, his grey eyes searching hers with uncommon intensity. I believe, she answered carefully, that honor may become its own prison when it silences truth. Something shifted in his expression, a momentary surrender to a sentiment he had long suppressed. Last night, I examined the fragment of wax seal found near your chambers. He withdrew the object from his waistcoat pocket. It bears an emblem unknown to me, yet vaguely familiar. Celine studied the fragment. It resembles the crest upon Lord Crispin's signet ring, though not identical. An astute observation. The Duke returned the evidence to his pocket. I have sent inquiries to London regarding recent correspondence bearing this seal. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Winters, who announced that Reverend Ward had come to call. They proceeded to the drawing-room, where the clergyman awaited with grave countenance. Your Grace, Miss Ashcroft, he greeted them with a formal bow. I bring troubling tidings from the village. Rumors circulate regarding the fire, suggestions of a most improper nature concerning your household arrangements. Adrian's expression hardened. Specify these rumors, if you please, Reverend. The clergyman hesitated, glancing uncomfortably at Selina. There are whispers that Miss Ashcroft's quarters were deliberately placed in proximity to your own, Your Grace, that the fire was divine judgment upon impropriety. Celine's face blanched, while the Duke's complexion darkened with suppressed fury. Who perpetuates this slander? I regret that it emanates from multiple sources, Reverend Ward replied, though I observed Lord Crispin in earnest conversation with several prominent matrons after your departure from the assembly. That afternoon, Celine retreated to the conservatory, seeking solace among the botanical specimens her father had once catalogued with such devotion. The glass-enclosed garden offered a semblance of peace amid the mounting tensions. She was arranging specimens of lavender when footsteps announced another presence. Lord Crispin Vale approached, his handsome features arranged in an expression of exaggerated concern. Miss Ashcroft, how fortuitous to find you alone. Celine stiffened, setting down her basket of herbs. Lord Crispin, I was not aware you were calling at Thornfield today. I came to express my sympathies regarding the fire. He moved closer, his voice dropping to an intimate register. How distressing that your private sanctuary should be so violated. Indeed, she maintained a careful distance between them. If you will excuse me, I should return to the house. Lord Crispin blocked her path with subtle determination. Before you depart, I feel compelled to offer you counsel, Miss Ashcroft. Your position here grows increasingly precarious. I thank you for your concern, but it is unwarranted. His smile did not reach his eyes. Is it? The county buzzes with speculation about the Duke's unusual devotion to his ward. Some suggest he honors his cousin's memory, others propose less noble motivations. Celine raised her chin, meeting his gaze with quiet defiance. The opinions of idle gossips concern me not at all. Perhaps they should. Lord Crispin leaned closer. For when scandal touches a woman without family protection, she becomes prey to those who would offer alternative arrangements. Before she could reply, another voice cut through the humid air of the conservatory. I believe Miss Ashcroft has adequate protection, Crispin. The Duke stood in the doorway, his powerful frame silhouetted against the light. His expression, as he regarded his uninvited guest, contained a warning that transcended social niceties. Lord Crispin withdrew with calculated nonchalance. Your Grace, I was merely offering consolation to Miss Ashcroft regarding her recent misfortune. Your solicitude is noted, Adrian replied coldly, and no longer required. As Lord Crispin departed, Celine released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The Duke approached, his concern evident beneath his composed exterior. Did he distress you? He merely confirmed what I already suspected, that whispers have become proclamations. She gazed up at him, her blue eyes troubled. Your reputation suffers because of my presence, Your Grace. Adrian's response was immediate and fervent. My reputation is of no consequence compared to your safety. He hesitated, then added in a lower tone, I have received intelligence from London. The seal fragment matches one used by a private club frequented by Lord Crispin and his associates. You believe he orchestrated the fire? I believe, Adrian said with careful precision, that someone wishes to create circumstances that would necessitate your removal from Thornfield and from my protection. As they stood among the fragrant herbs and blooming flowers, the glass walls of the conservatory reflected their figures, so close in proximity, yet separated by invisible barriers more impenetrable than the transparent panes surrounding them. The Thornfield Parish Church stood as it had for centuries, a sanctuary of grey stone and leaded glass where generations had marked the passages of life with solemn ceremony. On this particular Sunday morning, however, the sacred space hummed with an undercurrent of speculation as the Duke of Westmoreland entered with his household. The Duchess of Vale preceded them down the centre aisle, her regal bearing commanding deference from the assembled congregation. Selene followed at a respectful distance, a modest gown of dove grey complementing her quiet dignity. The Duke, resplendent in formal attire, completed the procession, his grave countenance revealing nothing of the turmoil that had engulfed Thornfield Manor in recent days. From the pulpit, Reverend Ward surveyed his flock with the knowing gaze of a shepherd well acquainted with the temperament of each sheep. His sermon, drawn from the Gospel of Matthew, dwelt upon the perils of judgment and the virtue of mercy, pointed selections that caused several prominent matrons to shift uncomfortably in their pews. Judge not, lest ye be judged, he intoned, his gaze sweeping across the congregation. How readily we condemn what we do not understand, and how frequently our condemnation reveals not the sin of others, but the limitations of our own hearts. The Duchess's spine stiffened perceptibly, while whispers rustled like autumn leaves through the rear pews. Celine kept her eyes fixed upon the altar, though a faint flush coloured her cheeks. Only the Duke remained impassive, his aristocratic profile betraying no reaction to the clergyman's thinly veiled admonishment. Following the service, the traditional exchange of pleasantries outside the church became an exercise in veiled hostility. Mrs. Harrington and her circle maintained a conspicuous distance from Celine, while Lord Crispin engaged the Duchess in animated conversation that frequently directed meaningful glances toward the Duke and his ward. Your sermon was most illuminating, Reverend, Lady Amara commented, joining Selina and Adrian as they prepared to depart. Though perhaps not universally appreciated, Reverend Ward smiled gently. The word often disturbs before it comforts, my lady. I merely present the mirror. Each soul determines what reflection it shall reveal. Sir Rowan Grey approached their small gathering, his manner as unassuming as ever. Your Grace, Miss Ashcroft, might I impose upon your hospitality this afternoon? I have certain matters to discuss regarding estate boundaries. The Duke nodded his assent, though his attention had shifted to where his aunt now stood in close conversation with the magistrate. The older man's furrowed brow and frequent glances toward Celine suggested a topic beyond mere social exchange. Upon their return to Thornfield, the household dispersed to their respective chambers to change from church attire. Celine had just completed this task when Lady Amara appeared at her door, her expression troubled. My dear, I must speak with you privately. She entered, closing the door firmly behind her. I overheard a most disturbing conversation between the Duchess and Mr. Harrington after the service. Celine seated herself at her dressing table, outwardly calm though her heart quickened. Pray continue. The Duchess has petitioned the magistrate to review your guardianship arrangement. Lady Amara's voice dropped to a whisper. She suggests that the Duke's judgment regarding your welfare has been compromised by inappropriate sentiment. A chill swept through Celine, despite the warmth of the spring afternoon. She seeks to have me removed from Thornfield. Worse, Lady Amara replied grimly. She intimates that your character requires the structure of a reformatory institution, one where young women of questionable circumstance might be properly guided. Before Celine could respond, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Martha, bearing a silver salver upon which rested a sealed note. From His Grace, miss. He requests your presence in the library immediately. The library of Thornfield Manor was a sanctum of leather-bound volumes and polished oak, where generations of Vances had retreated to contemplate matters of consequence. When Selene entered, she found the Duke standing before the great fireplace, his posture rigid with contained emotion. Sir Rowan sat nearby, his expression grave. Miss Ashcroft. Adrian greeted her with formal courtesy that did not mask the turbulence in his grey eyes. Please join us. Once she was seated, Sir Rowan cleared his throat. I fear I bring unwelcome intelligence, Miss Ashcroft. Certain documents have surfaced in London questioning the validity of your father's will and consequently your legal status. Celine's composure wavered momentarily. I do not understand. My father's affairs were settled 3 years past. Indeed, Sir Rowan agreed. Yet someone has presented evidence suggesting that your father contracted significant debts before his passing. Debts allegedly secured against your future prospects. The Duke's voice cut through the room like tempered steel. These claims are without merit. I have examined the original testament extensively. Nevertheless, Sir Rowan continued carefully, the allegations have gained sufficient traction to warrant official inquiry. The magistrate has been petitioned to review Miss Ashcroft's guardianship in light of these developments. Celine's hands trembled slightly in her lap. Who presents these claims? Sir Rowan hesitated, glancing at the Duke, who nodded for him to continue. The petition bears Lord Crispin Vale's signature, though it is supported by several prominent families, including, I regret to say, the Duchess herself. A heavy silence descended upon the library, broken only by the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Adrian moved to stand behind Celine's chair, a position that conveyed both protection and solidarity. What remedy exists? He inquired, his tone deceptively calm. The most expedient solution would be to establish Miss Ashcroft under alternative guardianship, perhaps with a female relation in another county, beyond the reach of local speculation. Sir Rowan's suggestion hung in the air like a sentence of exile. Celine rose suddenly, her quiet dignity asserting itself through the shock. I shall prepare to depart immediately. I cannot permit His Grace to suffer further association with these baseless allegations. Adrian's response was immediate and forceful. You shall do no such thing. He turned to Sir Rowan with newfound resolution. Prepare the necessary documents to challenge this petition. Miss Ashcroft remains under my protection until such time as she chooses to depart, not when society dictates. After Sir Rowan's departure, Celine and the Duke remained in the library, the weight of unspoken sentiments hanging between them like a veil too fragile to disturb. Your position becomes increasingly untenable because of me, she finally said, her voice barely audible. Perhaps the Duchess is correct. My presence here can only lead to further difficulties. Adrian moved to the window, his profile etched against the afternoon light. Do you wish to leave Thornfield, Miss Ashcroft? The directness of his question caught her unprepared. In the silence that followed, the truth that had remained unacknowledged between them seemed to materialize in the very air they breathed. I wish, she answered carefully, to cause no further damage to your standing or peace of mind. He turned to face her then, the rigid control that defined his public persona giving way to something more vulnerable. You have not answered my question. Their gazes held across the room, a current of understanding flowing between them that transcended the formal address they maintained. No, she confessed at last. I do not wish to leave. The medallion at his throat caught the light as his chest rose with a deep breath. Then you shall remain regardless of what machinations Crispin and my aunt devise. That evening, the small dinner party at Thornfield unfolded with excruciating formality. The Duchess presided at the table with Arctic civility, while Lord Crispin, who had invited himself on some pretext of estate business, directed his conversation exclusively toward Adrian, though his gaze frequently lingered upon Celine. I understand from the magistrate that certain irregularities regarding Miss Ashcroft's guardianship have come to light, Lord Crispin remarked, as the dessert course was served. Most concerning, particularly for a gentleman of your responsibilities, Westmoreland. The Duke's hand paused momentarily in the act of lifting his wine-glass. How remarkable that you should be privy to matters not yet formally presented. Lord Crispin's smile did not reach his eyes. One hears things in certain circles. I merely mention it out of concern for your position. Your concern is noted, Adrian replied coolly, and entirely unnecessary. Later, as the gentleman rejoined the ladies in the drawing-room, the Duchess drew her nephew aside, her voice pitched for his ears alone. This situation has become untenable, Adrian. The girl must be placed elsewhere before irreparable damage is done to our family name. The Duke regarded his aunt with the detached assessment of one seeing a familiar landscape from an entirely new perspective. Our family name has survived far worse than groundless gossip, Aunt. Groundless? Her pale eyes narrowed. The entire county speaks of nothing else but your inappropriate attachment to your ward. Even the magistrate questions your judgment in this matter, and you, of course, have done nothing to encourage such speculation, he replied, a note of realization coloring his tone. The Duchess drew herself up with offended dignity. I have sought only to preserve what your father built, a legacy of unimpeachable honor. Honor without compassion is merely pride, Adrian countered, echoing his earlier sentiment. My father understood this, even if you did not. Across the room, Lord Crispin had maneuvered Selina into a relatively private conversation near the pianoforte. His voice carried an undercurrent of threat beneath its cultivated smoothness. The storm gathering around you grows more formidable by the day, Miss Ashcroft. One wonders how long even the Duke's considerable influence can shield you. Selina maintained her composure, though her fingers trembled slightly against the polished wood of the instrument. Your concern is misplaced, Lord Crispin. His Grace has assured me of his continued protection. Protection? Lord Crispin laughed softly. Is that the term he employs? How very proper. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. Yet propriety is a fragile construct, is it not? So easily shattered by a careless word or compromising circumstance. Before she could respond, Sir Rowan approached, effectively interrupting the exchange. Miss Ashcroft, I believe Lady Amara was hoping you might favor us with a musical selection. As Selina moved gratefully away, Sir Rowan fixed Lord Crispin with a penetrating gaze. A word of caution, my lord. The Duke takes a most serious view of any threat to those under his protection. Lord Crispin's handsome features arranged themselves into an expression of injured innocence. Threat? I merely offered friendly counsel to a young woman in a delicate position. Sir Rowan's reply was measured but pointed. Not all counsel is friendly, nor all positions as delicate as they appear. As Selina began to play, a haunting nocturne that filled the drawing-room with melancholy beauty, Adrian observed her from across the room. The lamplight caught the gold of her hair and the grace of her posture as her fingers moved across the keys with fluid precision. Something in his expression, a softening of his austere features, a warmth in his typically guarded gaze, did not escape the Duchess's notice. Later that night, unable to sleep, Selina ventured to the library once more, seeking the comfort of literature to distract her troubled mind. She had not expected to find Lady Amara there, examining a volume with unusual intensity. Amara. I had thought everyone retired. Lady Amara started, hastily returning the book to a shelf. Selina, dear, I was merely pursuing a reference that might prove useful to your situation. Have you discovered something of significance? Lady Amara hesitated, then gestured for Selina to join her at a secluded reading table. I believe I may have uncovered the source of Lord Crispin's sudden interest in your affairs. She withdrew a small journal from her reticule. This belongs to my cousin, who moves in the same London circles as Lord Crispin. It contains certain observations regarding wagers made at their club. Selina accepted the journal with trepidation. Wagers? Concerning what matter? Concerning you, my dear, Lady Amara replied gently, and the Duke's extraordinary devotion to his ward. As Selina read the damning entry, her face drained of colour. The journal detailed a substantial bet, initiated by Lord Crispin, that he would succeed in removing Selina from the Duke's protection and into his own custody before the summer solstice. This is unconscionable, she whispered, closing the journal with trembling fingers. To make sport of another's reputation in so callous a manner. Lady Amara covered Selina's hand with her own. Men of Crispin's ilk view all of life as a game to be won, regardless of the cost to others. The Duke must be informed immediately. Indeed, Lady Amara's expression grew troubled, yet I fear this revelation may provoke him to action that could further complicate your position. Selene rose with sudden determination. I shall speak with him at first light. This manipulation cannot be permitted to continue. When Lady Amara had departed, Selene remained in the library, her mind racing with implications and possibilities. The fire, the rumors, the petition to the magistrate, all pieces of a calculated strategy to fulfill a gentleman's wager at the expense of her future. She did not hear the library door open, nor register another presence until the Duchess's voice cut through her reverie. Miss Ashcroft, how convenient to find you alone. Selene rose hastily, concealing the journal within the folds of her dressing gown. Your Grace, I apologize for the impropriety of my presence here at this hour. The Duchess surveyed her with clinical assessment. Impropriety appears to be a condition to which you have grown accustomed. She approached with measured steps, her silk robe rustling against the Persian carpet. I shall speak plainly, as our previous exchanges have proven insufficient. You must leave Thornfield immediately. I understand your concern for the Duke's reputation, Selene replied with quiet dignity, but recent developments suggest that the threat to his standing originates not from my presence, but from deliberate machinations by those who claim concern. The Duchess's expression hardened. You speak of matters beyond your comprehension. Adrian's future, indeed the very legacy of the Vance family, depends upon his making an advantageous match. Your continued presence makes such an arrangement impossible. Has His Grace expressed a desire for such a match? His desires are irrelevant, his duty is clear. The Duchess moved closer, her voice dropping to a silken threat. Consider carefully, Miss Ashcroft. Should you persist in this attachment, I shall be forced to present certain evidence to the magistrate regarding your father's indiscretions. Selene's composure faltered. What indiscretions do you imply? Gambling debts, inappropriate associations with married women, details that, when made public, would render you not merely dependent, but disgraced beyond redemption. The library door opened once more, admitting the Duke himself, his expression thunderous as he registered the tableau before him. Enough, aunt, he commanded, his voice resonating with suppressed fury. You will cease this persecution immediately. The Duchess turned to face him, her surprise quickly masked by aristocratic composure. Nephew, I was merely clarifying Miss Ashcroft's position. Her position, Adrian replied with dangerous calm, is secure under my protection. A fact that neither you nor Crispin nor the entire county's speculation can alter. As the Duchess departed with rigid dignity, Selene stood motionless before the fireplace, the journal containing proof of Crispin's wager still concealed within her gown. The Duke approached slowly, his anger giving way to concern as he noted her pallor. What did she say to distress you so? He inquired, his formal address at odds with the intimacy of the hour and setting. Selene hesitated, then withdrew the journal from its hiding place. It was not merely the Duchess's words that disturbed me, but this evidence of Lord Crispin's true motivations. As Adrian read the damning entry, his expression transformed from concern to cold fury. The medallion at his throat seemed to pulse with the rapid beating of his heart beneath his nightshirt. This explains much, he said at last, closing the journal with controlled violence, and clarifies what must be done. Selene moved closer, alarmed by the dangerous light in his eyes. What do you intend? Adrian's gaze met hers with an intensity that transcended propriety and position. In that unguarded moment, the truth that had remained veiled behind formal address and careful distance stood revealed in the silent library. I intend, he said with quiet certainty, to end this charade once and for all. The morning room at Thornfield Manor basked in the golden light of early summer. The French doors opened to admit the fragrance of roses from the garden beyond. Selene sat at a small writing desk, her pen moving swiftly across cream-colored stationery as she transcribed portions of her father's salvaged botanical journals. The task provided welcome distraction from the tensions that permeated the household. Miss Ashcroft, came Mrs. Winter's voice from the doorway. His Grace requests your presence in the study immediately. Sir Rowan Grey has arrived with news from London. Selene's heart quickened as she followed the housekeeper through the portrait gallery, where generations of Vances gazed down with aristocratic detachment. The past week had been one of strained anticipation, with the Duke maintaining a formal distance, even as his actions demonstrated unwavering commitment to her defense. The study door stood ajar, revealing Adrian in conversation with Sir Rowan. Both men turned as she entered, their expressions revealing nothing of the news that had prompted this urgent summons. "Miss Ashcroft," the Duke greeted her with a slight bow. "Thank you for coming so promptly. Sir Rowan brings intelligence that concerns your situation directly." Sir Rowan cleared his throat, his manner more assured than his customary diffidence would suggest. "I have obtained documents of significant import, Miss Ashcroft, correspondence between Lord Crispin and certain officials regarding your father's estate." He placed a leather portfolio upon the desk, withdrawing several letters bearing broken seals. "These establish a deliberate effort to fabricate evidence of debt against your father's name, debts that Lord Crispin subsequently claimed to have purchased from various creditors." Celine's composure faltered momentarily. To what purpose would he construct such an elaborate fiction? "To gain legal authority over your person and property," the Duke replied, his controlled tone barely concealing his indignation. "Had his petition to the magistrate succeeded, you would have been removed from my protection and placed under his guardianship until such time as the fabricated debts were satisfied." Sir Rowan nodded gravely. "The scheme is as ingenious as it is despicable. The forged documents would have appeared entirely legitimate to any but the most thorough examination." "How came you to discover this deception?" Celine inquired, struggling to comprehend the malevolence directed toward her. A ghost of a smile touched Sir Rowan's typically solemn features. "I have certain connections in London who owe me favours of a delicate nature. One such individual is employed as clerk to Lord Crispin's solicitor, a position that affords access to private correspondence." The Duke's expression darkened further. "The matter extends beyond mere financial manipulation. Sir Rowan has uncovered evidence linking Lord Crispin to the fire in the East Wing." Sir Rowan withdrew another document from the portfolio, a receipt for services rendered, bearing the signature of a man known in certain London circles for executing tasks of questionable legality. This individual was observed in Thornfield Village on the day of the fire, departing by the evening coach immediately following the incident. Celine sank into a nearby chair, the full impact of the revelation overwhelming her composure. Such calculated malice, and for what? A wager? "The wager was merely pretext," Adrian replied, moving to stand before the window, his powerful frame silhouetted against the morning light. "Crispin's ambitions extend beyond cruel sport. Your father's estate, though modest, includes land adjacent to Thornfield's southern boundary, property that contains a natural spring of considerable value." Sir Rowan nodded in confirmation. "Lord Crispin has recently invested heavily in a railway venture that would benefit immeasurably from access to such a water source." A silence fell upon the study as Celine absorbed the implications of these revelations. The Duke turned from the window, his expression resolute. "I have instructed Sir Rowan to present this evidence to the magistrate this afternoon. Lord Crispin's petition regarding your guardianship will be not merely dismissed, but revealed as the fraudulent scheme it represents." "And the Duchess?" Celine asked quietly. "Was she cognizant of these machinations?" Adrian and Sir Rowan exchanged a glance laden with significance. "My aunt's involvement appears limited to social manipulation rather than legal fraud," the Duke replied carefully. "Her motivations, while misguided, stem from concern for family standing rather than personal gain." Sir Rowan gathered the documents, returning them to the portfolio with methodical care. "I shall take my leave and proceed directly to the magistrate. By evening, the legal threat to Miss Ashcroft's position should be neutralized." When Sir Rowan had departed, Celine and the Duke remained in the study, the air between them charged with unspoken sentiments. Adrian moved to the fireplace, his hand coming to rest upon the silver medallion at his throat, the symbol of duty that had both bound and separated them. "You have been subjected to unconscionable treatment," he said at last, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. "I deeply regret that my protection proved inadequate against such calculated malice." Celine rose, approaching him with quiet dignity. "Your protection has been my salvation, Your Grace. Without it, I should have fallen prey to Lord Crispin's schemes long before truth could emerge." Adrian turned to face her fully, the formal mask of the Duke giving way to the man beneath. "Even so, I have failed to shield you from scandal and speculation, the very conditions my guardianship was meant to prevent. Perhaps," she ventured softly, "some truths cannot be concealed behind conventions of duty and propriety." Something shifted in his gaze, a surrender to what had remained unacknowledged between them. He took a step closer, the distance between them narrowing to something that propriety would deem improper, yet truth recognized as inevitable. "Celine," he said, her given name crossing his lips for the first time. "I can no longer pretend that my concern for your welfare stems merely from obligation." The use of her name, that simple, profound intimacy, caused her breath to catch. "Nor can I pretend that my gratitude is the only sentiment I harbor." Before either could speak further, the study door opened abruptly, admitting the Duchess of Vale. Her imperious entrance faltered as she registered their proximity, her pale eyes widening with undisguised dismay. "I see I interrupt a private conference," she observed, her tone frigid with disapproval. "How unfortunate that the door stood ajar, inviting further speculation regarding your professional relationship." Adrian did not step away from Celine, his posture suggesting protection rather than retreat. "What brings you here, Aunt? I had thought you engaged with correspondence this morning." The Duchess's gaze moved between them with calculated assessment. "I have received communication from London that disturbs me greatly. It appears that Sir Rowan has been making inquiries of a most irregular nature regarding Lord Crispin's affairs." "Indeed," Adrian confirmed without elaboration. "His investigations have proven most illuminating. I fail to comprehend your meaning." The Duke's reply was measured yet pointed. "Sir Rowan has uncovered evidence of fraud, forgery, and criminal conspiracy, all directed toward gaining control of Miss Ashcroft's person and property through false claims of debt." The Duchess's composure faltered momentarily. "Surely you do not suggest that Crispin, a gentleman of noble lineage, would engage in such base deception?" "Lineage does not preclude corruption," Adrian replied. "The evidence is conclusive and will be presented to the magistrate this afternoon." A heavy silence descended upon the study, broken only by the soft ticking of the mantel clock. The Duchess moved to a chair, her rigid posture betraying the effort required to maintain her dignity. "If what you allege proves true," she finally said, "it represents a shocking breach of honor. However, it does not alter the fundamental impropriety of Miss Ashcroft's continued presence in your household." Adrian's patience visibly thinned. "Enough, Aunt. Your campaign against Miss Ashcroft ends today. Whatever your concerns regarding family standing or suitable alliances, they do not justify the persecution you have directed toward an innocent young woman whose only transgression was to be placed under my protection." The Duchess rose with affronted dignity. "You speak as though my concerns stem from caprice, rather than care for your position. A gentleman of your standing cannot afford to be linked romantically with his ward, a connection that grows more evident with each passing day, regardless of your protestations to the contrary." Before Adrian could respond, Celine stepped forward, her quiet voice commanding attention. "Your Grace, I have remained silent in the face of your disapproval, out of respect for your position and relationship to the Duke. However, I cannot allow you to persist in this misrepresentation of my character or intentions." The Duchess regarded her with surprise that quickly transformed to cold assessment. "You presume to address me on matters of propriety, Miss Ashcroft." "I presume to defend my honor against unjust aspersion," Celine replied with unwavering composure. "The Duke has fulfilled his obligation to my father's memory with exemplary integrity. Any suggestion of impropriety exists not in our conduct, but in the minds of those determined to discover scandal where none exists." The tension in the study grew palpable as the two women regarded each other across an unbridgeable divide of perspective and position. Adrian observed this confrontation with a mixture of concern and admiration, his gaze resting upon Celine with unmistakable tenderness. Their standoff was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Winters, who announced that Lord Crispin had arrived unexpectedly and insisted upon speaking with the Duke on a matter of grave urgency. "I shall receive him in the library," Adrian decided, after a moment's consideration. "Miss Ashcroft, perhaps you would accompany my aunt to the morning room while this matter is addressed." Celine nodded her acquiescence, though concern shadowed her features. "Please exercise caution, Your Grace. Lord Crispin may suspect his scheme has been discovered." As the women departed, the Duke made his way to the library where Lord Crispin awaited with an air of fabricated nonchalance. His elegant attire and practiced smile could not conceal the calculation in his gaze as he greeted his host. "Westmoreland, most generous of you to receive me without appointment." "State your business, Crispin," Adrian replied without preamble. "I have pressing matters requiring my attention this morning." Lord Crispin affected an expression of wounded pride. "So formal, Adrian. We have known each other since Eton, a connection that makes your recent actions all the more reprehensible." A flicker of unease crossed Lord Crispin's handsome features. "I'm afraid I don't take your meaning." Adrian moved to his desk, withdrawing Sir Rowan's portfolio from a drawer. "Shall I enumerate your transgressions, or would you prefer to confess them voluntarily?" "The forged debt claims against Mr. Ashcroft's estate. The petition based upon these fraudulent documents. The fire deliberately set to destroy evidence of Miss Ashcroft's legitimate inheritance." Lord Crispin's practiced smile faltered, replaced by a wariness that suggested calculation rather than contrition. "You make serious allegations without proof, Westmoreland." "On the contrary," Adrian replied coldly, "I possess not only proof, but sworn testimony from your hired accomplice, the same individual who executed the arson at your instruction." Panic flickered in Lord Crispin's eyes, quickly masked by bravado. Even if such evidence existed, the word of a common criminal would hardly stand against that of a nobleman in any court. "Perhaps not," Adrian conceded. "Yet when combined with these documents," he tapped the portfolio meaningfully, "and the testimony of your solicitor's clerk, who has agreed to cooperate with authorities, the case becomes rather more compelling." A tense silence descended upon the library as Lord Crispin assessed his position with the desperate calculation of a gambler facing ruin. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its cultivated smoothness. "What do you propose?" Adrian's reply was immediate and implacable. "You will withdraw your petition regarding Miss Ashcroft's guardianship. You will sign a confession detailing your fraudulent claims against her father's estate. You will depart Thornfield immediately and never again approach Miss Ashcroft in any capacity. And should I refuse these draconian terms? Then I shall present the evidence to the magistrate this afternoon, and you may explain your actions from inside Newgate Prison." The Duke's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Choose quickly, Crispin. My patience grows thin." Recognizing defeat, Lord Crispin's handsome face contorted with resentment. "For you destroy my reputation to protect your ward's virtue, a commodity I suspect has already been compromised under your protection." Adrian moved with sudden, controlled violence, seizing Lord Crispin by his immaculate cravat and propelling him against the nearest bookshelf. "You will never again speak of Miss Ashcroft in such terms," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Not if you value your miserable existence." Fear replaced calculation in Lord Crispin's eyes as he registered the lethal intent in the Duke's gaze. "I meant no—" "You meant precisely what you implied," Adrian interrupted, releasing him with contemptuous force. "Sign the confession, withdraw your petition, and remove yourself from my sight. Those are your choices, Crispin. Make them wisely." An hour later, Lord Crispin's carriage departed Thornfield in haste, bearing its occupant toward London under the watchful eye of Sir Rowan's trusted associate. In the study, Adrian placed the signed confession in his safe, his expression grim yet satisfied. When Celine entered at his summons, he turned to face her with the weight of revelation in his gaze. "It is done. Lord Crispin has withdrawn his petition and signed a full confession regarding his fraudulent claims. Your father's reputation stands unblemished, as does your own." Relief washed over Celine's features. "Then the threat is truly ended. Crispin will not trouble you again," Adrian confirmed, moving toward her with deliberate steps. "However, my aunt's concerns, though misguided in execution, contain a kernel of truth that can no longer be ignored." Uncertainty clouded Celine's blue eyes. "What truth do you acknowledge, Your Grace?" Adrian halted before her, close enough that propriety would demand retreat, yet neither moved to increase the distance between them. "That my protection of you has transcended duty. That my concern for your welfare stems not from obligation, but from a sentiment I have struggled to deny since you first came under my care." The medallion at his throat gleamed in the afternoon light as he reached for it with uncharacteristic hesitation. "This symbol of family honor has guided my actions since my father's passing. I believed that duty required the suppression of personal desire in service to legacy and position." His fingers closed around the silver disc, a gesture of both recognition and release. "Yet I have come to understand that true honor lies not in denial of the heart, but in the courage to acknowledge its truth, even when that truth defies convention." Celine gazed up at him, hope and trepidation mingling in her expression. "And what truth does your heart acknowledge, Adrian?" The use of his given name, that simple, profound intimacy, seemed to dissolve the final barrier between duty and desire. "That I love you," he said, the words emerging with the force of long-suppressed conviction. "Not as ward or obligation, but as the woman who has illuminated the emptiness of duty without love." As the afternoon sun streamed through the study windows, casting their figures in golden light, the distance between guardian and ward, between duty and desire, vanished in a single moment of shared truth that required no further words. Outside the study door, unbeknownst to them, the Duchess of Vale observed this tableau with complex emotion. Her rigid adherence to propriety demanded intervention, yet something in the tableau before her, some recognition of a truth that transcended social convention, stayed her hand. She withdrew silently, her expression troubled yet thoughtful, as within the study, Adrian Vance and Selina Ashcroft stood at the threshold of a future neither had dared imagine, a future where honor and love existed not in opposition, but in harmony. The summer solstice arrived at Thornfield, with a day of exceptional clarity, the sky an unbroken expanse of azure unmarred by even the faintest cloud. In the formal garden, preparations for the annual midsummer gathering progressed under Mrs. Winter's exacting supervision. Garlands of roses and ivy adorned the stone balustrades, while footmen arranged tables beneath the ancient oak trees. Celine stood at her chamber window, observing this activity with mingled anticipation and apprehension. The past fortnight since Lord Crispin's departure had witnessed a transformation in her relationship with the Duke, a delicate evolution from formal guardianship to acknowledged affection, conducted with discretion that nonetheless failed to escape the notice of the household. "The lavender silk becomes you admirably, miss," remarked Martha, as she arranged Celine's hair in an elegant coiffure adorned with pearl pins. "His Grace will be most pleased." A soft flush colored Celine's cheeks at this implicit acknowledgement of what had become an open secret among the servants. "Thank you, Martha. Has the Duchess emerged from her chambers this morning?" Martha's expression grew guarded. "Her Grace breakfasted early and has been engaged with correspondence in the morning room. She has requested that the blue parlor be prepared for a private interview with His Grace before the guests arrive." This information heightened Celine's unease. Since witnessing the exchange in the study, the Duchess had maintained a frigid civility toward her nephew's ward, neither acknowledging nor openly opposing the altered dynamics between them. This requested interview suggested the armistice had reached its conclusion. When her toilette was complete, Celine descended to the library, seeking refuge among the leather-bound volumes that had provided solace throughout her residence at Thornfield. She had not expected to find Reverend Ward there, examining a collection of theological texts with scholarly interest. "Miss Ashcroft," he greeted her with genuine warmth, "you appear radiant this morning. The approach of midsummer clearly agrees with you." Celine accepted his compliment with a graceful nod. "The season brings both beauty and change, Reverend, sometimes more rapidly than one anticipates." "Indeed." His kind eyes reflected understanding beyond her words. "Change often arrives with both promise and peril, particularly when it challenges established order." Their conversation was interrupted by Sir Rowan Grey's arrival, his typically calm demeanor visibly disturbed. "Miss Ashcroft, Reverend Ward, forgive my intrusion. I bear news of some urgency concerning Lord Crispin Vale." Celine's heart quickened. "Has he returned to Thornfield?" "Not directly," Sir Rowan replied, casting a meaningful glance toward the open door before continuing in lower tones. "However, certain communications have arrived from London suggesting he has not abandoned his vendetta against you or the Duke." Reverend Ward frowned. "What manner of communications do you reference?" Sir Rowan withdrew a folded newspaper from his coat. "This morning's London Gazette contains a most disturbing item in the society pages, a thinly veiled account of a distinguished northern duke whose household arrangements have allegedly scandalized his peers." Celine accepted the paper with trembling fingers, scanning the indicated column. Though no names appeared directly, the particulars described left little doubt regarding the subjects. "This poison appears designed to reach beyond our local society." "Indeed," Sir Rowan agreed grimly. "Lord Crispin, having failed in his legal stratagem, now employs public opinion as his weapon. The article hints at forthcoming revelations regarding the Duke's ward and their unorthodox relationship. This represents a new level of malice," Reverend Ward observed, his customary gentleness hardening to righteous indignation. "To assault a young woman's reputation through such cowardly means." "The timing seems deliberately calculated," Celine noted, returning the paper to Sir Rowan. "Published on the very day of Thornfield's midsummer gathering, when the county's most prominent families will assemble here." The library door opened fully, admitting Adrian Vance, his expression grave. "I see Sir Rowan has already shared the morning's unpleasant tidings." He moved to Celine's side with the natural gravity of a planet to its sun, propriety now secondary to protection. "I have dispatched messengers to London with instructions for my solicitors to pursue legal remedy against the publication." Such action may come too late to prevent the damage to Miss Ashcroft's reputation, Sir Rowan cautioned. The Gazette circulates widely among society's influential circles. Adrian's response carried the calm certainty of a decision already reached. Then we shall address the matter directly, before speculation can take root. He turned to Celine, his grey eyes seeking hers with unguarded tenderness. If you are willing, understanding dawned in her expression. You propose to announce my intention to make you my wife, he completed, his voice pitched for their small circle alone, not as a reaction to scandal, but as the acknowledgement of a truth we can no longer, and should no longer, conceal. A silence fell upon the library as the full import of his declaration registered with their companions. Reverend Ward was the first to speak, his tone reflecting careful consideration rather than immediate endorsement. Such an announcement, made before the assembled county, would indeed preempt malicious speculation. Yet, have you considered the Duchess's response? Her opposition to this connection has been made abundantly clear. My aunt's concerns stem from tradition rather than malice, Adrian replied. She believes that marriages of our rank should serve alliance and advantage rather than affection. A wry smile touched his lips. A perspective I once shared, until circumstance taught me its hollowness. Sir Rowan cleared his throat delicately. Speaking of the Duchess, she was engaged in most animated conversation with Lady Harrington when I arrived. I fear the Gazette's insinuations may already have reached local society through separate channels. This intelligence lent urgency to their deliberations. Adrian turned once more to Celine, the question in his eyes requiring no verbal articulation. Her response came with quiet certainty. I will stand beside you, whatever course you deem appropriate. Their exchange was interrupted by Mrs. Winters, who appeared at the library door with uncharacteristic discomposure. Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. A carriage has arrived bearing a gentleman who insists upon speaking with you immediately, a Mr. James Ashcroft, who claims to be Miss Ashcroft's uncle. The announcement struck Celine with physical force, the colour draining from her face. Impossible, she whispered. My father had no living brother. Adrian's arm moved instinctively to support her. Show this person to the blue parlour, Mrs. Winters. I shall attend him directly. When the housekeeper had departed, Celine turned to Adrian with visible distress. This must be some new stratagem of Lord Crispin's, perhaps an impostor hired to create further scandal. Or perhaps, Sir Rowan suggested carefully, someone with legitimate connection to your family, whose existence was unknown to you. Adrian's expression hardened with protective resolve. Whatever his identity or purpose, we shall discover it together. He offered his arm to Celine with formal courtesy that belied the intimate concern in his gaze. Shall we meet this unexpected visitor? The blue parlour, with its delicate French furnishings and pastoral landscapes, provided an incongruously serene setting for the tension-filled encounter that awaited them. Upon their entrance, the room's sole occupant rose from his seat, a man of middle years, his attire suggesting modest prosperity rather than aristocratic connection. Miss Ashcroft, he greeted Celine with a slight bow. The resemblance to your mother is most striking. Celine studied him with guarded assessment. You claim kinship with my father, sir, yet he spoke of no brother during his lifetime. Half-brother, the man corrected gently. Born of your grandfather's second marriage, some years after your father left home. We met only once, briefly, before his passing. Adrian maintained his position at Celine's side, his posture suggesting readiness to intervene if necessary. You arrive at a curious juncture, Mr. Ashcroft, precisely when questions regarding your niece's parentage have become matters of public speculation. Something like pain flickered across the visitor's weathered features. I come not to complicate Miss Ashcroft's circumstances, but to provide what assistance I may in clarifying them. He reached into his coat, withdrawing a packet of letters bound with faded ribbon. These communications from my father, your grandfather, may prove illuminating. As Celine accepted the packet with trembling hands, the midsummer sun streamed through the parlour windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like suspended secrets in the charged atmosphere. Outside, the first carriages bearing guests for the gathering began to arrive, their wheels crunching on the gravel drive, as past and present converged upon Thornfield with inexorable momentum. The midsummer gathering at Thornfield Manor proceeded with the orchestrated elegance that defined the Duke of Westmoreland's hospitality. Beneath canopies of cream silk that billowed gently in the afternoon breeze, the county's most prominent families engaged in the practiced rituals of society. Polite conversation, punctuated by meaningful glances, Alliances formed and severed over champagne and strawberries. Duchess Meridia Vale presided over the refreshment pavilion with rigid composure that betrayed nothing of the morning's revelations. Her grey silk gown and diamond parure established her precedence without requiring verbal assertion, while her narrowed gaze tracked her nephew's movements with calculated assessment. Celine stood somewhat apart from the main gathering, engaged in quiet conversation with her newly discovered uncle near the rose garden. James Ashcroft's unpretentious manner and genuine concern had slowly dissolved her initial suspicion, replacing it with cautious acceptance of his unexpected kinship. "Your father was a brilliant man," he remarked, studying a particularly fine specimen of white rose that had captured Celine's attention. Too brilliant, perhaps, for the conventional path expected of gentlemen's sons. His decision to pursue botanical research rather than a military or clerical career estranged him from our father. Celine traced the velvet petals with gentle fingers. He never spoke of this estrangement, though I sensed a sorrow in him when family connections were mentioned. Pride and principle formed an impenetrable barrier between them, James replied with a rueful smile. A family trait, I fear, that persisted until it was too late for reconciliation. Their conversation paused as Lady Amara Wynne approached, her emerald gown a vibrant contrast to the pale flowers surrounding them. "Celine, dearest, I have been searching for you. The Duke requests your presence near the oak terrace." As James excused himself to partake of refreshments, Lady Amara linked her arm through Celine's, leading her along the gravel path with purposeful steps. "The entire gathering buzzes with speculation regarding your mysterious visitor," she confided. "The Duchess appears particularly discomposed by his arrival." "Mr. Ashcroft is my father's half-brother," Celine explained, "unknown to me until this morning. He brings letters and documents that establish my father's legitimate birth and inheritance, evidence that directly contradicts Lord Crispin's allegations." Lady Amara's expression brightened. "How providential! Such evidence presented at this precise moment seems almost divinely orchestrated." "Indeed," Celine agreed, though a shadow of concern crossed her features. "Yet it raises questions regarding how my uncle learned of my circumstances and why he chose this particular day to appear." They found Adrian engaged in conversation with Sir Rowan and Reverend Ward beneath the ancient oak that dominated Thornfield's western terrace. His formal attire, immaculate black tailcoat and silver waistcoat, emphasized the powerful grace of his figure, while the silver medallion at his throat caught the afternoon sunlight as he turned to greet their approach. "Miss Ashcroft," he acknowledged her with a bow that conveyed both public propriety and private significance. "I trust your conversation with Mr. Ashcroft proved illuminating." "Most profoundly," Celine confirmed. "He brings documentation that establishes beyond question my father's legitimacy and my rightful inheritance of the Ashcroft property, modest though it may be." Sir Rowan nodded with satisfaction. "Such evidence will prove invaluable in countering the insinuations published in this morning's Gazette." "The timing of Mr. Ashcroft's arrival seems remarkably fortuitous," Lady Amara observed, echoing Celine's earlier thought. "One might almost suspect divine intervention." "Or human calculation," came the Duchess's voice as she joined their circle with imperious presence. "I wonder, nephew, if you have questioned how this previously unknown relation discovered Miss Ashcroft's whereabouts and circumstances with such convenient precision." Adrian met his aunt's gaze with composed challenge. "I have considered the question, Aunt. As it happens, Mr. Ashcroft has provided a most straightforward explanation. He learned of Celine's situation through an advertisement placed in the London papers following her father's death, an advertisement seeking any family connections that might provide insight into the disposition of the Ashcroft botanical collection." "An advertisement placed by whom?" the Duchess inquired with arch skepticism. "By myself," Adrian replied evenly, "at the request of my late cousin, who suspected that Edward Ashcroft's family history contained complexities beyond his daughter's knowledge." This revelation silenced the Duchess momentarily, while Celine regarded Adrian with newfound wonder. "You never mentioned this effort to locate my relations?" "The advertisement yielded no immediate response," he explained, his gaze softening as it met hers. "And as your guardian, I saw no purpose in raising hopes that might prove unfounded." The Duchess recovered her composure with practiced efficiency. "How conscientious! Yet it does not explain why this connection emerges precisely when Miss Ashcroft's relationship with you has become a matter of public speculation." "Perhaps I might illuminate that particular mystery," offered James Ashcroft, who had approached their gathering unnoticed. His unassuming manner contrasted sharply with the Duchess's imperious presence. I responded to His Grace's advertisement some months past, but received no reply. It was only when I observed the article in this morning's Gazette that I realized the urgency of establishing my niece's legitimate connections. The Duchess regarded him with thinly veiled disdain. How convenient that you should appear at the precise moment when such connections might prove most advantageous. James met her gaze with unexpected steadiness. I seek no advantage, Your Grace. My circumstances are modest but comfortable. I come only to provide what support I may to my brother's daughter, support he would have wished her to receive. As this exchange unfolded, Celine became aware of the gathering audience their conversation had attracted. Guests had gradually migrated toward the oak terrace, drawn by the unusual tableau of the Duchess in apparent confrontation with an unfamiliar gentleman. Among them, she noted Lady Harrington and her circle, their expressions betraying avid interest in this unexpected development. Adrian perceived the growing attention with the acuity of one long accustomed to public scrutiny. With decisive grace, he turned to address the assembled company, his voice carrying across the terrace with clear authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to introduce Mr. James Ashcroft, newly arrived from Yorkshire, and uncle to Miss Celine Ashcroft, ward of my late cousin, and now under my protection. A murmur rippled through the gathering as this announcement registered. Adrian continued with deliberate intent. Mr. Ashcroft brings documentation that conclusively establishes his niece's legitimate parentage and inheritance, matters that have recently become subject to unfortunate speculation. The Duchess stiffened perceptibly, recognizing the strategic nature of this public declaration. Before she could intervene, Adrian proceeded with the air of one executing a carefully considered plan. His arrival proves most timely, as I had intended today to make an announcement regarding Miss Ashcroft's future. He turned toward Celine, extending his hand with a gesture that transcended mere courtesy. A future that, with her consent, will be joined with my own. The ripple of murmurs transformed to a wave of audible reaction, gasps, whispers, and exclamations of surprise that washed across the terrace. The Duchess's face paled to alabaster, while Lady Amara's expression bloomed with undisguised delight. Celine placed her hand in Adrian's with quiet certainty, her composure remarkable amidst the storm of attention their tableau had generated. "You have my consent," she replied, her voice soft yet clearly audible in the sudden hush that had fallen over the gathering. Adrian's fingers closed around hers with gentle strength as he addressed their audience once more. "It has been my privilege to serve as Miss Ashcroft's guardian this past year. It shall be my greater honor to call her wife." Into the profound silence that followed this declaration came the sound of slow, deliberate applause. All eyes turned to its source, Reverend Ward, whose benevolent smile suggested approval of divine rather than merely social sanction. "A most fitting union," the clergyman pronounced, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority that even the Duchess hesitated to challenge. "One that I shall be privileged to solemnize in God's house when the appropriate arrangements have been completed." This endorsement broke the momentary spell of stunned silence. Congratulations began to flow from various quarters, led by Sir Rowan and Lady Amara, while others in the gathering exchanged glances that ranged from scandalized to speculative. The Duchess remained rigidly immobile, her expression unreadable as she observed this public acknowledgement of her nephew's decision to place affection above alliance. When she finally moved, it was with the deliberate grace of one who recognized that the battlefield had shifted beyond her ability to control. "Nephew," she addressed Adrian with formal precision, "I request a private audience before further celebrations commence." Adrian inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Of course, Aunt. Perhaps you would join me in the library in half an hour's time." As the gathering gradually dispersed into smaller groups, the announcement now providing fertile ground for conversation throughout the gardens, Celine found herself momentarily alone with Adrian in the shadow of the ancient oak. The medallion at his throat caught the dappled sunlight as he reached for it with decisive motion. "This emblem of duty has guided my actions since my father's passing," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I once believed it represented obligation to family legacy, above all else." With steady hands he removed the silver medallion from around his neck, a gesture witnessed by none save Selene. "I now understand that true duty encompasses not merely obligation to the past, but courage to embrace the future." He placed the medallion in Celine's palm, closing her fingers around the warm silver. Will you keep this until I have concluded my conversation with my aunt, as a token of the promise between us that transcends convention or expectation?" As the medallion's weight settled against her skin, a tangible symbol of the transformation their relationship had undergone, Selene raised her gaze to meet his. In that moment, beneath the ancient oak that had witnessed generations of Vances define their legacies, guardian and ward acknowledged the truth that had emerged from the shadow of obligation, a love that required no protection beyond its own strength. "I shall guard it faithfully," she promised, "until you reclaim it, not as burden but as blessing." The afternoon sun illuminated Adrian's austere features, softening them with golden light as he smiled, a genuine expression rarely witnessed by Thornfield society. "Not as burden, but as blessing," he echoed, words that might apply equally to love mistaken for duty. As he departed to meet his aunt, Selene remained beneath the oak, the silver medallion warm against her palm, a circle of precious metal that, like their journey from obligation to affection, had no beginning and no end. James Ashcroft approached, his expression reflecting genuine concern. "I fear my arrival may have precipitated decisions that might otherwise have awaited more conventional timing." Selene smiled, the medallion now concealed within the folds of her lavender gown. "On the contrary, uncle, your arrival merely hastened the acknowledgement of what had already been decided in our hearts." As they stood beneath the ancient oak, observed from a distance by curious guests who maintained respectful distance, neither could know that within the library a confrontation unfolded that would determine not merely their future happiness, but the very nature of duty and desire within the walls of Thornfield Manor. The chapel at Thornfield Manor stood bathed in autumn light, its Norman arches and worn stone steps bearing witness to generations of Vance family rites. Now, as crimson and gold leaves danced upon the September breeze, it prepared to observe another passage, one that bridged duty and desire with unprecedented harmony. Inside, flowers adorned every surface, not the expected white roses of traditional weddings, but wildflowers and herbs gathered from the meadows surrounding Selene's childhood home. Their untamed beauty and medicinal properties reflected both her father's legacy and her own journey from dependent ward to woman of independent strength. In the small antechamber, Lady Amara adjusted the final details of Selene's attire. A gown of ivory silk adorned not with costly lace, but with embroidered botanical specimens rendered in golden thread, each plant chosen for its significance in the story that had brought her to this moment. "You appear positively radiant," Lady Amara observed, arranging the simple veil of Brussels lace that had been her own contribution to the bride's ensemble. "Though I suspect your glow emanates less from these adornments than from within." Selene smiled, touching the silver medallion that hung from a slender chain around her neck, no longer a symbol of duty alone, but of transformation and renewal. "I find myself strangely calm, despite the extraordinary path that led to this day." "Not so extraordinary," came the Duchess's voice from the doorway. Meridia Vale entered with measured steps, her gown of silver-grey silk suggesting acquiescence rather than celebration. The months following the midsummer announcement had witnessed a gradual thawing in her opposition, not to wholehearted approval but to a reluctant acknowledgement that her nephew's happiness transcended conventional alliance. "Every Vance for generations has married for advantage or connection," she continued, approaching Selene with assessing gaze. "Adrian is the first to choose based on sentiment alone." "Not sentiment alone, Your Grace," Selene replied with gentle firmness, "but rather recognition that true advantage lies beyond mere title or fortune." Something shifted in the Duchess's expression, not quite softening, yet no longer rigid with disapproval. "Perhaps," she conceded, adjusting a strand of pearls at her throat, "the past months have demonstrated a certain wisdom in Adrian's choice that I had not initially perceived." This acknowledgement, the closest to blessing the Duchess had offered, hung in the air like delicate perfume as James Ashcroft appeared at the antechamber entrance. "The guests are assembled," he announced, his pride evident as he beheld his niece in bridal array. "And His Grace awaits with such anticipation that Reverend Ward has twice been required to remind him of proper ecclesiastical patience." This image, the imposing Duke of Westmoreland, rendered impatient by love, brought smiles to all present, even tugging at the corner of the Duchess's mouth. She departed with a formal nod, leaving Selene to take her uncle's arm for the processional that would transform Ward to wife, obligation to covenant. The chapel's interior glowed with candlelight, as Celine moved down the aisle, each step marking passage from one life to another. Adrian awaited at the altar, his tall figure resplendent in formal attire, though it was not his external elegance but the unguarded emotion in his grey eyes that caused whispers of appreciation to ripple through the assembled guests. Reverend Ward conducted the ceremony with eloquence that emphasized transformation rather than mere union, the alchemy of duty refined to devotion, protection elevated to partnership. When the couple exchanged vows, Adrian's voice carried the resonant certainty of a man who had discovered truth beyond tradition, while Celine's responses reflected the quiet strength that had emerged from dependency. "What God hath joined together, let no man put asunder," intoned Reverend Ward as the ceremony concluded. The words echoed against the ancient stones, carrying the weight of divine sanction for a union that had defied societal expectation. The wedding breakfast that followed in Thornfield's Great Hall combined elegance with unexpected warmth. Sir Rowan Gray proposed the first toast, his typically reserved manner giving way to genuine sentiment as he raised his glass. "To the Duke and Duchess of Westmoreland, may their union prove that true nobility resides not in title or tradition, but in the courage to recognize where duty and desire become one." As the celebration progressed, Adrian and Celine circulated among their guests with the natural harmony of planets in shared orbit. Lord Crispin Vale was conspicuously absent, his scheme to claim Celine's property having collapsed completely when James Ashcroft produced additional documentation establishing her undisputed ownership. The London Gazette had published a retraction of its earlier insinuations, though the article announcing the Duke's marriage to his former ward ensured that society would long discuss the unconventional romance. In the late afternoon, as guests departed in carriages that wound down Thornfield's oak-lined drive, Adrian led Celine to the conservatory, where her father's botanical collection had been reinstalled with meticulous care. Sunset painted the glass walls with amber light, transforming the space into a cathedral of living specimens. "I have something to show you," he said, guiding her to a section devoted to rare medicinal plants. There, in pride of place, stood a specimen long thought extinct in England, a delicate herb with star-shaped flowers that had featured prominently in Edward Ashcroft's final research. "Stellaria redemptio," Celine whispered, recognizing the plant from her father's journals. "How did you obtain it? His last expedition failed to locate living specimens." Adrian smiled, the formal mask of the Duke entirely absent in this private moment. "Sir Rowan's connections extend to botanical explorers in the Americas. When I learned of your father's quest, I commissioned a search." His fingers intertwined with hers as they stood before the rare plant. "It arrived yesterday, a wedding gift more precious than any jewel or silver." Celine turned to him, the medallion gleaming at her throat. "You restored not merely the plant, but a piece of his legacy, our legacy now." "Our legacy extends beyond specimens or property," Adrian replied, his voice deepening with emotion. "It shall be what we build together, neither bound by convention nor defined by its rejection, but forged from choice, freely made, and promise faithfully kept." As twilight descended upon Thornfield Manor, candles illuminated the windows that had witnessed generations of Vances define duty according to the strictures of their time. Now in the conservatory, where science and sentiment flourished in equal measure, the newest Duke and Duchess of Westmoreland embraced a definition that transcended either tradition or revolution, one written not in family chronicles or society columns, but in the quiet certainty of hearts that had discovered honor in honesty and protection in mutual strength. Later that evening, as moonlight silvered the gardens and most of the household retired, the Duchess Meridia Vale stood alone in the portrait gallery, regarding the stern visages of Vance ancestors with thoughtful assessment. The sound of approaching footsteps announced Adrian's presence before he spoke. "I had thought you retired, Aunt." She turned, her expression unusually reflective. "I found myself contemplating legacy this evening, how each generation interprets duty according to its understanding." Adrian moved to stand beside her, both now facing the portrait of his father, a man whose rigid adherence to tradition had been tempered by unexpected compassion. "And what conclusions have you reached?" The Duchess was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed upon the painted eyes that seemed to hold secrets beyond the canvas. "That perhaps I have defined duty too narrowly," she finally said, the admission clearly costing her considerable effort. "Your father once told me that honor without heart becomes mere pride, a lesson I dismissed as sentiment unworthy of our station." She turned to her nephew, the moonlight through the gallery windows casting her proud features in silver relief. "I observe in your bride a strength of character that transcends her origins. Perhaps your father's wisdom extended further than I permitted myself to recognize." This concession, the closest to blessing the Duchess would ever verbalize, hung between them like a bridge tentatively extended across a chasm of perspective. Adrian accepted it with the grace of one who understood its significance. "She brings light to rooms long shadowed by mere duty," he said simply, "as I believe my mother once did for my father, though I was too young to fully witness it." The Duchess nodded almost imperceptibly, memories briefly softening her austere expression. Elizabeth had a similar quality, the ability to see beyond convention to the heart of matters. She straightened, resuming her customary poise. "I shall depart for London tomorrow. Thornfield requires privacy for its new mistress to establish her presence." Adrian recognized this announcement as both tactical retreat and tacit acceptance. "You will always have a place here, Aunt, whenever you wish to return." "Perhaps at Christmas," she replied, a hint of warmth briefly illuminating her typically cold gaze. "By then, I expect Thornfield will have found its new equilibrium between tradition and transformation." As autumn deepened toward winter, Thornfield Manor indeed discovered fresh harmony under its new mistress's influence. The formal drawing rooms remained elegant, but acquired comfortable touches that invited conversation rather than merely hosting it. The extensive library expanded to include volumes on botany and natural philosophy that would have scandalized previous generations of Vances, but reflected the union of diverse knowledge that now defined the household. Most significantly, the conservatory flourished under Celine's devoted care, becoming not merely a collection of specimens, but a sanctuary where science and beauty coexisted in perfect balance. Here, local physicians came to consult on medicinal applications, while village children were occasionally admitted to learn the properties of plants that grew in their native fields and woods. On a crisp December morning, with snow dusting Thornfield's grounds like sugared confection, Adrian discovered his wife in this glass-walled haven, carefully documenting the progress of her father's rediscovered stellaria. The medallion gleamed at her throat as she bent over her journal, recording observations with the precision that had characterized Edward Ashcroft's research. "You have transformed this space," Adrian observed, moving to stand beside her amidst the verdant life that defied winter's grasp outside. "As you have transformed Thornfield itself." Celine smiled, setting aside her pen to meet his gaze. Not transformed, perhaps, but revealed what always existed beneath convention and expectation, the potential for growth beyond prescribed boundaries. He took her hand, the simple gesture conveying the intimacy that had deepened beyond the initial recognition of sentiment to profound partnership. "Much as you revealed what existed beneath my own adherence to duty alone." "Not beneath it," she corrected gently, "but within it, the heart of honor that gives obligation its true meaning." As snow continued to fall beyond the glass walls, coating Thornfield's ancient oaks and formal gardens in crystalline purity, the Duke and Duchess of Westmoreland stood amidst living evidence that protection need not confine, that duty could nurture desire, and that promises made in honor could flourish into love that transcended the very conventions that had first brought them together. Outside, a robin alighted briefly on the conservatory roof, its red breast vibrant against the winter white, nature's reminder that warmth persists even in the coldest season, just as truth eventually emerges from the shadowed corners of duty misunderstood as denial rather than devotion. In the dance between duty and desire, we often mistake obligation for sacrifice, viewing honor as the denial of our deepest truths. Yet Adrian and Selene's journey reveals a profound wisdom. True nobility lies not in rigid adherence to convention, but in the courage to recognize when duty and love become one unified purpose. The medallion that once symbolized Adrian's burden of obligation transformed into a token of liberation when he discovered that protection need not distance, and honor need not deny the heart. Like the silver disc that passed between them, our greatest commitments are not chains but circles, complete only when they encompass both responsibility and love. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in Selene's quiet strength, which transformed dependency into partnership. She reminds us that acceptance of protection need not diminish our own power, but can instead create the sanctuary where both souls grow stronger. In a world that often forces false choices between head and heart, duty and desire, convention and truth, a promise beyond honor beckons us toward integration rather than division. The most enduring commitments are not those made from obligation alone, but those in which duty becomes the vessel that carries love safely through life's tempests. Did this tale of honor transformed by love touch your heart? Subscribe now to journey through more emotional historical romances where duty and desire dance in exquisite tension. Each story unveils the profound transformations possible when convention meets genuine feeling. Leave a comment sharing which character's journey resonated most deeply with you. Was it Adrian's evolution from duty-bound guardian to a man who discovered love within obligation? Or perhaps Celine's quiet strength that transformed vulnerability into partnership? Your perspective enriches our storytelling community.